In this video, I paint the still life without using black or gray paint. Many art teachers recommend not using black on your palette, and that's so you can learn how to mix grays and blacks from colors. This will teach you the important skill of how to neutralize colors. Plus, many of the colors you think of as being gray actually contain subtle hues. And if you're to paint that using a neutral gray, your painting can end up looking flat. Whereas if you mix it from colors, it'll add more depth to your painting. There are timestamps in the description below so you can jump to the sections you're most interested in. You can download this reference photo when you sign up for my free email newsletter. I also include my acrylic color mixing chart as a PDF. There's a link to the newsletter sign up in the description below. Here's my reference photo, and it's mostly black and white. The only color is the strawberries. You might assume that you could use black paint to mix the background and the table color. However, there are subtle colors in here, and that's the first point that I have is a lot of the colors that you think are gray actually have color in them. And you can see this in the bowl specifically. I can show you this on my tablet just so you can see it better. When I zoom in there, you can see the top part of the bowl has like a warmish color to it. And the highlight on the left is more cool. It has some blue in there. I added a black and white filter to this photograph. And if I turn it on and off, you should be able to see the color differences more. You can see the top part of the bowl is warmer and the left highlight is cooler. Now if I zoom in, you might see that a little bit more. So my point is, if you use pure gray for the color of that bowl, it would look flat. Whereas if you mix it from colors, it has more depth. And even the countertop, if I turn that black and white filter on and off, you'll see there's color in there too. You see how dull that looks when it's black and white? The white streaks of the countertop, they seem to have like a bluish tint to them. And even the black areas seem to have a little bit of color in there. So I sketched this out with acrylic markers. These are the acrylic markers from Liquitex. They have the same pigments as their regular paints. I used a grid to make this faster to draw out. I showed the whole process in my previous video about how to paint the illusion of transparent glass. There are links to all the related videos in the description below. This grid comes off easily just by misting it with water and wiping it off. But the acrylic marker is water resistant, so that stays put. I was thinking for this top area, I'll use mostly ultramarine blue and burnt sienna to mix it black, and I can mix gray from there. I think I'll have to add other colors to it just to get it to match and have a little bit more depth. For the rest of it, especially the bowl, I think I'll use primary colors that mix blacks and grays. So I'll set up my colors and I'll start painting. Here are the colors I'm using. I'm using the Golden Open line of acrylics. So this is Phthalo Blue, and it's the green shade. Quinacridone Magenta. I think that's the end of that tube. I'll just use a palette knife to get the rest of it out. Benzimidazolone Yellow, medium, and this is the replacement for Hansa Yellow. Any transparent yellow would work for this. Ultramarine Blue, it's one of my favorite colors. That cap is stuck. Last time I used the golden tube opener. You can also use pliers if you don't have the tube opener. And when you do that, you want to make sure that you grip the entire tube with your other hand so that when you twist this open, you don't happen to tear open the tube itself. I've done that, so that's how I know not to do that. Somebody suggested in the comments last time to run it under hot water to loosen it up. So I'm going to try that and see if it works. I ran that under hot tap water, and I have a rag to get a better grip on the cap. So let's see if that helped. Yeah, it opened right up. So that does work. So thank you to the person that recommended that. And finally, titanium white. All right, so I'll scrape that out later, but I do have a big tube of titanium white. I do recommend getting larger tubes of white because you end up using more white than any other color. In case you're wondering, this is a glass cutting board placed in a Masterson palette. I have an entire video on how I set this up, but I find that the cutting board is cheaper than palettes that are made for artists, and the corners are nice and rounded, and it fits perfectly within the Masterson palette. Cleaning it up is a breeze with one of these razor scrapers, and it doesn't matter if the paint's dry, it comes right up. Much faster than cleaning a plastic palette. I'll start by using the burnt sienna to mix like a black. So it's burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, and you just have to get the ratio right for it to turn black. If you don't have burnt sienna, you can also use burnt umber. And I've also used raw umber. All right, so that's really dark. I don't need it that dark for the background, so I add white to it. So I'll add some magenta in here. It's closer, I think it needs a little bit more white and magenta. And this is just the first coat I'm going to put on the background real quick. It's not like I need this to be super accurate. I'll do that the second time around. So a little bit more magenta. Just in case you're following along with your own painting, I later realized this print is much too magenta. So don't add as much magenta as I do here, because I correct for it later on in the video. I left this part in the video instead of starting over to show that painting often involves making mistakes and adjusting for them as you go. It's too much magenta, but I could see a little bit of yellow would correct that, I think. So it looks a little bit better. So just add a little bit more. I'll add a little bit of white for the section at the bottom here. Next, I'll mix a dark color that matches this countertop from what I consider to be the primary color. So this is phthalo blue and quinacridone magenta. So the basic idea here is I'm mixing a purple. I think you need more magenta than you do the blue. And to desaturate that, I'll just add a transparent yellow. This is the benzimidazoline yellow. It starts to dull that down. It's not as vivid. I could add a little bit of white over here. So I'll just mix this all up. I do think it needs more yellow. If you want it really dark, you have to get the balance between the colors right. So if I add more phthalo blue, you see how dark that gets? So if I compare this to the photograph, you can see that this isn't a pure gray. And if I add white to this, we'll see how close I am. So I'll add it off to the side here before I add it into the whole thing. There's more warmth in here. I can see that's more magenta, so I'll add some magenta in there. And you also have to factor in that your printer probably isn't totally accurate. Mine sort of tends to lean towards the magenta side. And I think it needs yellow too, just to make it warmer. That's pretty close. There's a lot of glare on the paint and the print. Some of the light from this background is being reflected on this black countertop, especially since it's shiny. And the color of the room actually affects the color. So if you know that metal is gray, but it does reflect what's in front of it. So this is reflecting the black of the countertop, but then there's a lighter color that's beyond that that's being reflected too, and that's warmer. So that's why painting neutrals is kind of difficult, because you have to be able to see those subtle differences. Mixing black will help you to learn how to make those subtle adjustments, and it's something that you should practice. Okay, so I just realized that my printer definitely goes way too magenta. I'm looking at the original photo on my tablet, and the gray is more neutral. So that's pretty easy to correct. I'll just add some yellow in here. I won't be able to match it exactly because the screen is emitting light and it's going to be brighter than what you see on the canvas. So for example, those real bright highlights in the strawberry that are almost pure white, that's brighter than the plain white of the panel. So I can't go that white, and you have to think about that when you're mixing colors. So I'll just mix this yellow in here. I think a little bit of ultramarine blue will help too. Touch of white. So this is a good example where you start a painting, you go in a certain direction, and then you realize something's a little bit amiss, and you have to correct for it. So it's not as if I do a painting start to finish and I don't make adjustments. There's tons of adjustments that I make. So I'm adding ultramarine blue. Okay, so I'll add a little bit of white. And more yellow. So it's just a matter of how warm and cool it is. So you can see this is more neutral than what I had to begin with. That was kind of purplish. So that's not too bad. I think it still needs a little bit more yellow. It's not too bad for that area. I'm getting a lot of reflection on the screen, but I think that's a good place to start. I can adjust it as I go. I would say that's the right value, but it's too purple. So the same thing, I'll add a little bit more yellow in here, and perhaps some blue. It's not too bad. I think maybe a little bit more of each. So I just added more of the yellow and some phthalo blue in here. And that's pretty close. I think I could start with that and then make adjustments. So I'll do that to the rest of this color and I'll start painting. So that's a good lesson here, is that your printer is probably inaccurate, and even your computer monitor can be off too. I'll start off with this background color. And like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. I'll just put this in and I can come back and adjust it later. There's a darker section here, and then it lights up by the edge of the countertop. So I'll fill in this section here because it seems to be a little bit darker all the way down to about here. And then it gets lighter towards the table. For the lighter sections, I'll just add a little bit more white to it. Like I said, I don't have to worry about blending it too much right now because I'm just trying to get the colors blocked in. I'm thinking I could mix up a little bit of the lighter color That way I can paint it all around the strawberries and then lighten up towards the countertop. So I'll add a little bit of white to this gray that I have mixed up. The other thing too is I don't really finalize the color until I get all the colors blocked in because they influence each other. This side it gets lighter, but on the other side it gets even lighter because the light source is coming from the left. And I'll probably soften the edge where it meets the countertop. I like these flat brushes because you can get into corners pretty well with them. Right here there's a part where the leaf meets the strawberry and I can get in there with that corner of the brush. It also makes sense to save this background color because if you go too far with like the color of the strawberry, you can correct it by painting back in with the background color. So maybe I will blend a little bit of this just to soften it up. And this is like a soft watercolor brush. I find it works well with the open acrylics. So that looks pretty smooth. I'm just going to cut in around these strawberries real quick because I think it's all pretty much the same color. It's kind of like painting a room in a house where you do the trim first and then you can just fill in the open areas real quick. So I'll see if I can soften this. Just doing circular motions, and then I'll go back and forth a little bit here. It's kind of like the dark color streaks down a little bit here. I might be able to pull up some of that light color over here to get that effect. I'm just trying to pull it up towards the top, and then I can go across it to get rid of some of those streaks. And like I said, it gets a little bit lighter over here, so I'll add a little bit more white in there. I'll start working my way back up into the regular gray background and then I can just blend it as I go. So maybe I need a little bit more of the lighter color in there first. That's a little bit better. And this is the darkest section. I'll have to finesse this a little bit. So I'll pick up my blending brush. It helps to like wipe off the color, so if you pick up something that's too dark, you don't pull it into the lighter sections. I'll probably come back to this, so I'll just leave it like this for now. Next, I'll start on the countertop color, and I think I'll start with the lighter vein color of the countertop. And you can see I have this flipping back and forth between the color and the black and white. It's a little bit bluish. For the highlight section, I'll just use titanium white and maybe a little bit of phthalo. It's probably a little too much. I could add a touch of magenta and yellow, and that should tame it down a little bit. It won't be as vivid. Maybe a little bit more white. Oops. That's about right. I think if I just want to tweak it, I can add a little bit of these warm colors to it. I'll just paint that in there so that I don't paint over it with a darker color. It doesn't have to be super accurate because it's just a random pattern, and then I can also go back in with the dark color. So if I paint this too wide, I could just cut into it. You'll notice how much darker this is than the white of the panel. That's another issue you'll run into is just judging how light or dark something is. So the print is useful for like just drawing from, like I am now, but for the color, I'm relying more on the tablet. I think that's good enough for now. I'll start putting in the dark color just to see how this looks. This looks dark on screen, but it's more of a darkish gray and it has some color in there. So I'll paint around these highlight colors, and the thing is, there's a lot of back and forth. I started with the highlight color, now I'm painting the negative shapes around it, and I'll probably come back in with more of the light color. So it's not as if I get it right on the first try. And I do notice that the countertop color does get lighter towards the foreground, so I'll add a little bit of white in there. And that's the thing is, like, you mix up a batch of color like this, and then you can just make minor adjustments to it. I'll just add a touch of yellow to that. It needs to go warmer. I think it's a little too light. So you see how that's lighter than the section above it. So I'll just soften this while the background's still wet. I'll go back and forth like this, and then I can go move it up and down slightly, and that way it blends the color into each other. I think it might need to go a little bit darker so I can add some of this color at the top. I'll mix some of the colors of the bowl, and that's where it gets interesting because this is a nice warm color and this is more of like a cool gray. I added a couple more colors to my palette. This is Pyrrole Red. I forgot to add that in there for the strawberries. But I also added Cadmium Yellow Primrose, and that's more opaque than the Benzimidazoline Yellow. I'll start by mixing like an orangish color, and I think I can add a little bit of ultramarine blue in there to make kind of like a brownish color. If it was too much blue, I'll add more yellow and some of this red. So I have like a greenish brown color. I think if I had more red and my whites underneath the tablet. So it's like a light brown color, but I think it's too greenish. And if I add a little bit of this quinacridone magenta, that should warm it up. Pretty good for like this section right here. I could add more magenta. And just a touch of ultramarine. It's pretty good for the color along the top. I could add more white to it. The screen is much lighter than what I need. So if I add more white to this, right there, that's not bad for that section right there. And I'll add more white to it with the paintbrush. For this section here, it does look grayish, but there's definitely blue in there. So if I take some of this gray color that I already have mixed up, I could add some white to it. So that's ultramarine, and then I'll add more white to lighten it up. I do think just a touch of like this phthalo blue. So I dimmed the screen a little bit, and you can see it's not too bad. It needs more blue. In the center here, it does get more blue if I add some phthalo in there. So I might mix up a little bit more volume here and then start painting the bowl. Need to add a little bit of white to this warm color, and that's because this reflection gets a little bit lighter here. I need a darker color for the very center of that, so I should probably wipe my brush off, and I'll take some of this dark color. I'm just working it into the highlight color. I think I'll leave it like that for now. It does have to get darker here, but if I let this set up a little bit, it'll be easier to get that in there. I'll start painting this section over here, which is a little bit more of a cool color, especially in the middle here. And here's some of that cooler gray. Now it looks like gray, but when you look at the palette, these aren't neutral. So you can see how there's like subtle colors in each of these mixtures. And that's what gives the painting depth. So now I'll work into like the lighter color that I mixed up. I think it needs more white. I added just a little bit more blue to this, and I'll add some more white. Just wipe my brush off so I can blend this a little bit. And I think I'll put some of that color over here while I have it on my brush. I think I'll start with this shadow color and see how that looks. There's like an indentation on this part of the bowl. The shadow color continues over here, but what I did notice is that in the photograph, the bowl is actually darker than the countertop. So I have to add some of the darker color there. This is that darker color, and I'll just start working it in. So if I put that right on the edge, it does look darker. I also notice in the middle here, there's some sections that seem a little bit darker than the bottom here. I'm just trying to blend these two sections together. That'll make it look a little bit more smooth and shiny. So I always say to rotate the canvas however you need to get into these nooks and crannies. Looks like I missed a couple spots here. This edge is a little bit harder than what I have, especially right at the edge. It gets lighter. I'm going to eat lunch and then take a walk. So I'll just give that a light mist and cover it up. That should keep the paints wet until I get back. So I'm going to finish putting in the reflections on this side of the bowl, and then I'll move on to the strawberries. This part of the reflection gets a little bit warmer, and then it transitions into like a cool gray. It's time to work on the strawberries, which is the most colorful part of the whole painting. I forgot to put red out on my palette earlier because I was thinking mostly about the background. So this is Parallel Red. I'll put that in there full strength and see how that looks. It might need a little yellow. So I'll put in some of the cadmium yellow. I think I'll put in like the highlight sections first, and then I'll go in and put like the darker red in for the shadows. So I filled in the bright red, and this is a combination of the Parallel Red and ultramarine blue. I'm just trying to smooth out the dark areas into the bright red areas. For the highlights on the strawberry, I think I'll use mostly white and maybe just a touch of the red. It's like the highlight goes around the shape of the seed. I think it might actually be better to wait for the red to dry so that I can get the white highlight to stick on there a little better. So I'll move on to painting the leaves. So this is the cadmium yellow. And I'll use the ultramarine blue because that'll make a dull green. I think what I'll do is paint these all the same green and then go back in with like a dark color for the shadows. Some sections of those leaves are lighter and a little bit more yellow. This one is facing the light. So this green is phthalo blue and the benzimidazolone yellow. Then I added a little bit of the red and quinacridone magenta to make it darker. So those leaves look pretty flat until I put the highlights and the shadows in there. And I'm just blocking this in for now. There's more detail in here I'll put in later, but I just want to get the basic colors in for now. I have all the colors blocked in. Now it's a matter of refining it and adding details. I don't like adding in details until I have all the colors blocked in. And that's because when you add a color in there, it affects what surrounds it. So I don't want to make any fine adjustments until I know what everything looks like. I'll probably start with the countertop and then work my way into the bowl and then the strawberries. I might do the background again just to smooth it out. When I get into this stage, it helps to like pick an area and just sort of finish it or get it close to being finished. That way it feels like you're making some progress. I let this dry overnight and there's some sections that are still wet. You can see it's glossy. This is dry, but this is still a little bit tacky. It's not coming off on my glove, but you can tell that it's not totally cured. And the same down here, you can see all these glossy areas. I think the first thing that I'll work on are the strawberries. I think I need to fix the color because it's too reddish orange. I think there needs to be more magenta in there. Plus, I could put some detail to the leaves. My paints are still wet, so none of this is going to waste. I might scrape up some of these areas and make room for more mixtures. That's the thing is, once you get so far advanced into a painting, it's kind of like you need to reset things in order to make room for more work. So like right now, I wouldn't be able to mix any colors because this is all filled up. So maybe I'll scrape some of this up and make some room. I'm using a brush to get the last bit of this magenta out of the tube. So when I'm done with this, there's pretty much nothing left. There's a little bit left in the cap too. So I'll start with the magenta, a little bit of red, and some white. I'm just trying to get a sense of like what shade of red would be best. And then I could mix up more. I think that's too much white, maybe a touch of yellow, but not as much as last time. This has a little bit of yellow in it, and I'll just see what it looks like when I paint it on the strawberry. I think this might be better. It was just way too orange for a strawberry. And I think it gets more reddish as it gets darker here. I'll probably work on one of these strawberries, and then if I like the way it looks, I'll do the same thing to the rest of them. I spent some time correcting the color on this strawberry and the one behind it. I also detailed the green parts. I'll just follow that through and fix these strawberries on the left. So I'm not totally happy with this background. I think it has to go a little bit lighter towards the countertop. There's also like a tint to this that I don't like. I think maybe it needs to go more bluish. I mixed up these three colors right here. This is the darkest version, and here's the lightest. So I'll brush these in and then blend them out. I also want to cut in around these strawberries to fix some of the shapes of the leaves. That's another reason why I do the background twice sometimes, is to smooth it out, but also to make corrections. So I'll just get started and put in some of this lighter color. It's quite a bit lighter, but it will create more contrast. As I move further up, I just dip into some of the darker shades, and that way it sort of blends as I go. I think another important thing would be to take this darker color and just see if it's what I'm looking for. It looks a little bit lighter than the color that's already down, but it's also cooler. They're both mixed from ultramarine blue and the burnt sienna, but I think the background color the first time around had more brown in it, and that's what I don't like. So I'll just cover over that real quick. A small brush helps with getting in around the strawberries. I'm mixing these two colors together on the palette. That way there's less blending I have to do on the actual painting. The hard part is blending it into the area by the strawberry. So I'll build up some color here with a smaller brush, then I can work into it. Now that I have some color built up, I can take a softer brush and just start smoothing it out. I'm working this highlight color into like the mid-tone section here. That's not too bad. And with just a little bit of blending, that totally smoothed that out. Now to get closer to the strawberry, I'll just take a smaller brush like this and work that lighter color in there. And the thing is, this gets lighter over here too, so I'll have to put some of the lighter color over there. It's interesting that this gray is not made from black, it's made from color. That's the thing about when you mix black from colors, is that you can create different tones. The first time it went down, it was a little bit more on the brownish side, but but this time around it's a little bit cooler. So you have more control that way. All right, so I'll put some of the lighter color in here. This is like the mid-tone color. So I'll quickly paint in some of these sections around the leaves and the rim of the bowl. Let's go a little bit darker. Now I'll do the same thing and blend these together. Right now I'm just doing circular motions, and that seems to be smoothing out any uneven brush strokes. It also sort of gets rid of the actual physical like bristle marks to some degree. So I'll just touch up these little areas and then probably move on to maybe doing the countertop or finishing off the bowl. I think I might lighten up some of this countertop material and soften the edge. So in order to do that, this still has to be wet, and so does the countertop. So I'm just putting in some of this color, and then I can soften that up a little bit. There's always this stage in the painting where you turn the corner, you know it's going to work out, but there's a bunch of tiny things you need to take care of before you can call it done. And that's where I'm at right now. So I'm going to work on the countertop a little bit more. I'm going to make it lighter. I'll probably work on the stainless steel bowl a little bit, just smooth out some of the reflections. Here's the finished painting. I added some more details to the strawberries. Up next, you can watch my acrylic painting playlist, my video about how to blend student acrylics like oils, or my tutorial on how to paint the illusion of transparent glass. Thanks for watching.